Good morning and welcome to the Capitol Hill Forum on Gulf War Illness. For today's forum, we're truly fortunate to have such an impressive lineup of distinguished speakers. They're among the nation's leading Gulf War illness researchers and clinicians. We'll next hear from Dr. Beatrice Golomb, MD and PhD. She's professor of medicine at the University of California, San Diego School of Medicine. She's the director of the Golomb Research Group. She's the former scientific director and chief scientist at the Research Advisory Committee on Gulf War Veterans Illnesses. And she's the author of a RAND/Department of Defense publications, including a review of the scientific literature as it pertains to Gulf War Illness, Volume 2, pyridostigmine bromide, and then co-author of two other RAND publications, one on pesticides, another on infectious diseases. With that, Dr. Golomb, welcome, and we look forward to hearing you. Thank you.
Okay, next slide, please. So you've heard that mitochondria are the energy powerhouses of cells, and we were the first to show that mitochondrial function is impaired in veterans with Gulf War illness. In the tracing on the upper left, you see phosphocreatine in muscle levels decline with exercise and then recover with rest, and the rate of recovery depends on the rate of energy production by mitochondria. So delayed or prolonged recovery time is tied to impaired mitochondrial function. In the upper right, we see a graph of the time constant for recovery of phosphocreatine in veterans with Gulf War illness on the right, and in controls matched 1-to-1 on age, sex, and ethnicity on the left. And we see that recovery time is prolonged, delayed in veterans with Gulf War illness. The table shows, combining two independent studies, that the average value in controls, this time constant for recovery, is about 30 seconds, and it's more than 50% longer, more than 45 seconds in veterans with Gulf War illness. The p-value is 0.001. This is the probability that the effect could occur by chance alone is 1 in 1,000. Highly significant. By convention, significance occurs if the p is less than 0.05. Next slide. So we followed up on this finding by looking at actual mitochondrial energy production in muscle tissue from veterans with Gulf War illness and controls, and we then correlated mitochondrial function impairment to symptoms. We see here 20 symptoms, each chosen to be present in half or more of veterans with Gulf War illness in the last 2 weeks, and then the correlation of the symptom to mitochondrial function, and again, the significance. And we see that all the correlations are negative, which means the higher the symptom, the lower the mitochondrial function, as we would predict. And for 17 of the 20 symptoms, these findings were significant or borderline significant, meaning less than 1 in 10 chance that it could occur by chance. And likely these would have been more significant, except the study was cut short because of COVID. This isn't a generic finding that happens with anything that's different in Gulf War veterans. For example, C-reactive protein, which is a marker of peripheral inflammation, which is elevated in Gulf War illness, didn't correlate or borderline correlate with any of these symptoms, which doesn't exclude an important role, by the way, for neuroinflammation, which you've heard about. Next slide. So if mitochondria are important, we hypothesized that perhaps mitochondrial genetics might contribute to why there are such widespread differences in Gulf War illness severity. So mitochondria have their own DNA, which you inherit only from their mother, and we hypothesized that two things: haplogroup U, which is an inherited profile of mitochondrial DNA, which turned out, in fact, to be more common in veterans who were ill than in people who are not. And also, mitochondrial DNA mutations might set people up to be more vulnerable to these toxic exposures and have higher severity of illness. The severity index was the previously mentioned 20 symptoms, each scored 0 to 10 in the last 2 weeks, so total maximum possible score of 200 points. The average score in veterans with Gulf War illness was 100 points, but you get 45 more points from having haplogroup U and 50 more points from having mitochondrial DNA mutations. And these are independent, so if you have both together, you have almost 100 more points on top of an average value, by the way, again, of 100 severity points for veterans with Gulf War illness. And each of these findings are highly significant, 1 in 1,000 or less probability that these findings could occur by chance. Next slide. So can this idea that mitochondria are impaired in Gulf War veterans lead to successful treatments? We hypothesized that coenzyme Q10, which is a mitochondrial cofactor that supports cell energy production by mitochondria, might improve Gulf War illness. We did a double-blind, randomized, placebo-controlled study. And 3.5 months of coenzyme Q10 at 100 milligrams a day compared to placebo led to significant improvements in general health in symptoms. In fact, 19 of the 20 symptoms showed the right direction, and many were individually significantly improved on CoQ10, and also in objectively measured physical function, where more than twice as many improved on Q10 compared to placebo. Incidentally, the magnitude of the rise in blood levels of Q10 related significantly to the improvement in function and related also to the improvement in health. Incidentally, we're following up on this with a mitochondrial cocktail study to see if we can expand the benefits of CoQ10 by adding in other mitochondrial energy supports. And also we're inaugurating a phase 3 trial, a large clinical trial of coenzyme Q10 compared to placebo in Gulf War illness. Next slide. We sought to harvest the over quarter-century treatment experience of the Gulf War veterans in a survey in which over 500 Gulf War veterans participated. And by the way, Gulf War veterans had tried on average scores of different treatments, many well over 100 different treatments in this time. And for each treatment, we looked at the number who we cited as the very best of all the treatments they had tried, and took that in ratio to the number who cited as the very worst. And that's what's graphed here. So on the far left are the best treatments, those with a high number citing as the best and fewer no citing as worst. And on the right are the worst treatments. And we see that CoQ10, which fits with this data derived specifically in Gulf War illness, was among the very best of treatments according to Gulf War veterans. And the other of the best we're developing a treatment study to look at now. But also important are the items on the far right. The 3 downward going arrows are antidepressants, including SSRIs like Prozac and Paxil, which the VA has long recommended as treatments for Gulf War illness. Yet these were among the very worst, according to veterans, of the treatments they had tried, with more veterans citing them as the very worst thing they had tried than the very best. So this sort of invalidates the approach of the VA that suggests that you can simply transport treatments that are beneficial in other conditions that may share some similar symptoms. Depression can cause fatigue and it can cause cognitive problems, but yet the treatments that are used for depression were among the very worst, among hundreds of treatments tried by Gulf War veterans, according to these veterans. So to conclude, Gulf War illness specific research leads to breakthroughs that can lead to treatments that can improve the lives, health, symptoms, and function of Gulf War veterans with Gulf War illness who have so nobly served their nation. Thank you so much.
Dr. Golomb, thank you very much for that presentation. And I'd just like to clarify, in case it wasn't clear, the treatments, the study that Dr. Golomb was referring to with over 500 veterans responding, those were treatments that veterans had tried on their own, not necessarily in clinical trials. We're now going to move to the Q&A portion of the forum. I see there are a couple of questions already there that I'll direct to the presenters. Please now feel welcome, particularly congressional staff members and VA officials, to enter your questions for the presenters in the chat box during our Q&A opportunity. If you prefer to submit your questions later, please submit them to our email address, anthony@veteransforcommonsense.org. Here's another question. Is there enough data to get any insight? This is for the presenters. Is there enough data to get any insight on whether any of the identifiers and potential treatments appear to identify and or treat a wide range of Gulf War illness symptoms, or do they tend to focus on a select array? Does it appear the things wrong with us can be reversed, as in it isn't permanent damage, or is it leaning towards stopping the progression? Sure, Beatrice, Dr. Golomb, why don't you go ahead, please, and Dr. Sullivan.
Yes, in our CoQ10 trial, 19 of the 20 symptoms chosen for being present in more than 50% of those with Gulf War illness in the last 2 weeks showed a favorable direction of benefit, and many of those were individually significant. And this went across broad domains, including pain, cognitive function, fatigue, muscle function, et cetera. So yes, some of these treatments can support many different symptoms and domains affecting veterans with Gulf War illness.
We have a question now for the researchers. How much more research do we actually need for veterans with Gulf War illness? Is there a hard end date in sight? After decades of research, what specifically is the end goal of all of this research?
Really, this is like cancer. You've made some progress, but there's more progress to be made. And as long as these veterans who served their country with such honor continue to suffer, we should be continuing to try to improve their lives with additional research to produce better and better treatments that more completely alleviate their symptoms, improve their function, and improve their future.
Thank you. Here's another question: for the researchers, is the VA involved in any of these studies? Are they aware of them? Is the data being actively shared?
I'd like to interject a comment, which is that having been at the VA and also seen what's gone on here, I do think that there has been a major difference between the success per dollar that has occurred with CDMRP relative to the VA. And I think that an important piece of that is that veterans themselves give the input into what is funded in the CDMRP, which is not equally the case in the VA. And I think it's critically important that the most important stakeholder have a role in helping to guide what the character is of the research that is undertaken.
From our good friends over the Fleet Reserve Association, how do veterans sign up for clinical trials? That's related to that. Dr. Golomb, would you like to respond to that question of how do veterans sign up for your clinical trials?
Absolutely. Anyone is welcome to email me at bgolomb@ucsg.edu. Our clinical trials are now nationwide, and we also have other studies that accept people from around the country, and we're delighted to hear from you to evaluate your interest and appropriateness for our studies. So thank you so much.
Question is there any estimate on a time frame for a viable treatment? Who would like to respond to that? Just feel free to jump right in.
I guess it depends on how you define a viable treatment. Again, for CoQ10, there's an existing successful randomized controlled trial, albeit it's a small study, and I think replication in a larger trial will be required before it's accepted as a treatment, but it's something that's available over the counter for patients to get themselves right now, although they won't be able to get it through the VA.
And just noting again from Dr. Golomb's presentation earlier that larger trial has in fact been funded and is now or will soon be recruiting, and also the study that Dr. Golomb has funded on that particular area with both CoQ10 and other bioenergetics in a mitochondrial cocktail is the name of that study. And interesting, that study is recruiting nationwide as well, so you don't have to be in a particular location to participate. Her information is there on the screen now. So with that, that concludes our presentation for today. We are very pleased that you have joined us here today, and for those watching later, thank you for tuning in. We appreciate all of our many co-hosts, 15 veterans and military service organizations and advocacy organizations. We're deeply indebted to our incredibly talented and brilliant researchers, distinguished scientists and clinicians who have presented today, and to all of our friends and allies in Congress and in the executive branch. We thank you for your support of Gulf War veterans and trying to assist in improving their health and lives as they so desperately need. So thank you very much for today, and this concludes our forum.